Hello, welcome to the Collaboration Negotiation channel. And for those who know me, I am a professional negotiator of over 10 years experience. And on this channel, I like to talk about Brexit, which is the biggest sort of negotiation theme there has been in recent years. And I've also liked to talk about vaccines and COVID and stuff, and I've done a previous video on that. So in this video, I'm going to combine the two. Now, part of the reason why I do that is, or why I picked this topic, there's two reasons. I'll come to the second in a minute. But the first reason is I always like to impress upon people who wish to conduct any negotiation that negotiation behaviours have consequences. And behaviours are important, not just in terms of inside the negotiation room, but also what happens outside negotiation rooms, including wider organisation, senior people, anyone who's public facing, basically. And that the impact of what they do or what they say can have a direct impact on whatever activity it is you wish to negotiate. So this is the theme for this particular video, and I thought I'd talk about it. So, the reason why I picked this topic is because quite recently the BBC did an article on vaccine nationalism. I will put a link to that article in the video description down below. And there's a link here, it's not particularly clear, if you can see that as well. And they did a TV documentary, I think it's about half an hour long as well, on this very topic. So my apologies for anyone watching this who is not based in the UK and may not have access to the BBC. But the short story is that the BBC covered the development of the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, how that progressed, how that got politicised, and what the impact of that politicisation was in terms of supply and in terms of its availability to the developing world, places like Africa, for example. And it's important to understand that because this AstraZeneca, more so than the other vaccines, was designed specifically to be available to the developing world. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the first point I want to make here in relation to this topic is that vaccine supply inequality was inevitable. Right from the very beginning of the pandemic, it was very clear that all the vaccine supply was essentially going to be locked up by government negotiators, politicians and so on. That was easy to see, and it's logical because no politician can justify not securing vaccines for people in their country. And those with the largest clout, those with the money, were the ones able to get first in the queue. It is a sad truth, but it is absolutely inevitable that was going to happen. However, there was at least a pretense at trying to be decent. And I don't mean the COVAX soon that the World Health Organization put together, that was genuine. I mean various world leaders, various nation states did at least try to make a pretense that they were going to try and be equitable in the supply of vaccines, particularly to nations who couldn't afford it, who didn't have the capability to manufacture it either. So on that manufacturing theme, I've said that there was vaccine competitive. Nations became vaccine competitive. And you can see how this came about. The first nations to produce highly effective vaccines were going to be seen as world leaders in times of crisis. And world leaders have big egos. They like to look good on the world stage. And so it actually did become a race. It became a race to develop highly effective vaccines in the shortest time possible. And that wasn't just for ego purposes. That was for political reasons as well. You may all remember, or choose to forget even, that the pandemic put significant strain on political leaders in all countries. not just in terms of the decisions that they had to make and the consequences of those decisions, but also in terms of their political support. Because the message to tell people that they were going to be confined to their homes, fined by the police, restricted from doing normal daily activities because of the virus, was never going to be an easy one. And so various leaders became desperate to turn that into a good news story. And the way they did that was by talking up the success of that country's scientific labs and so on to produce vaccines, and sort of vaccine nationalism, essentially, I suppose. So, and it was a race, and they were competing with each other in a way. And that had, yeah, I remember that. I remember the people like Matt Hancock, who was the Health Secretary of the UK Health Department, and who was at the time very much talking about this race and how much money they were pumping into things that they were doing. This was to keep up political support. And I've no doubt the same was happening in the US, although that was a very different environment because Trump was in charge. It also would have been the same in the EU and in Germany and so on. So the Germans would have definitely have talked about Pfizer and how that developed in Germany and so on. So there was that race. Unfortunately, and I hate doing this, unfortunately Brexit got involved. And this is one of the big problems about Brexit, is that when you see it, you kind of see it everywhere in a way. And you can't help but seeing that Brexit made this situation, this race, this competition, this nationalism, and this shortage of supply all so much worse. And I'm going to go into a little bit the reasons why that happened. So first, as I said, AstraZeneca was a vaccine developed by UK labs in conjunction with the Swedish giant, the Swedish pharmaceutical company, and it all credit to the Oxford team that developed it. They wanted this to be a cheap, readily available vaccine that could be distributed at scale to anyone, developed and developing world. So one of the things that the BBC documentary did highlight, and we knew this already, is that the UK government wanted to stick the British flag on those vaccines as they were going out. This was resisted by the company, and this was resisted by the scientists, and thank goodness for that. They wanted to take the moral high ground, they wanted to do the good thing. However, of course, this meant that the Health Secretary, like Matt Hancock, the Prime Minister, like Boris Johnson, would be boasting about these vaccines, and they still do that today, Boris in particular. He still boasts about how the UK had the fastest vaccine rollout in the EU, as if that matters anymore. But that is a political bit of messaging, and that was important to those politicians. But annoying as that sort of thing is, I'm actually going to give them a minor pass on that. And the reason why is because it didn't materially affect anything. They didn't restrict supply, beyond that of just ordering it all, of course, but I've covered that. That was entirely to be expected. They didn't restrict supply. They didn't do anything, and they did actually promote the need for that vaccine to go to the developing world. So on this one, despite all the boasting, despite the political rhetoric, I'd say they didn't cause direct harm. So we shall overlook that for now. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said within the EU. And this is one of the things that I kind of need to stress. The toxicity that surrounds Brexit is not exclusive to UK politicians. In many videos on this channel, I have pointed out to all the bad behaviours by various UK ministers and politicians, the things that they do. However, I also have to stress that they are far from alone. In a previous video, I talked about how the EU Commission completely messed up the ordering of the AstraZeneca vaccine. They failed to understand that you cannot just create a contract and expect it to be delivered like you would a car production line. and I'm using a bit deliberately German analogy here because it was the Germans that pretty much did all this in some ways. They treated the AstraZeneca vaccine like a car production line that, you place the order and X numbers of vehicles or vials will come out reliably as anything. Vaccines are not a mechanical process, they're a biological process, and things go wrong. And anyone who understands anything about managing risk in this sort of area would understand that and put together appropriate mechanisms and an appropriate contractual mechanism to handle that. The EU did not do that, and because of the political pressure they came under, they turned this into a political issue, the EU versus the UK, in a sense. And it is very rare that I give Boris Johnson credit for anything, but on this particular occasion, he was well briefed and did not rise to debate. He did not counter back, and he refused to say anything inflammatory, which is very rare for him, on this one, and he actually came out looking better than the EU on this issue. However, the damage was done. AstraZeneca vaccine is now seen as a delayed, whether deliberately or accidental, whichever depends which media outlets you read, I suppose, but it was seen within the EU as a British vaccine that hadn't been delivered to them when it should have been. I cannot say I read German or French newspapers, but I did get a sense of some of the things they were saying from friends and colleagues, and I know that what they were reporting was grossly inaccurate. So they didn't properly explain the issue, properly explain what was happening, and laid a fault clearly with the EU Commission. The political leaders of the countries did. Many of them didn't really blame the UK. They actually knew that the fault lay with the EU Commission, which of course increased the pressure on the Commission. However, in terms of the general public and the media reporting, I would say the messaging was probably a bit different. Then things got worse. And things got worse because President Macron decided to get all nationalistic. And he's a very pro-European Union. There's no particular issues with that. But in order to try and defend the EU, he felt the need to try and push down the AstraZeneca vaccine. And so he made a whole load of claims about it, that it wasn't effective, it caused harm, it couldn't be used in older people, and so on. And at a time when there's an awful lot of vaccine hesitancy or anti-vax sentiment, this was an incredibly irresponsible thing for Macron to do. He should have been far more measured in his comments. He should not have escalated it in the way that he did. But he did, though. And this is what I mean when I talk about the toxicity of Brexit. Is that because the likes of Johnson has behaved badly and made various political points, if you were, Macron felt the need to do the same. I previously talked about these two facing off each other as, with big egos. And this was a prime example. And unfortunately, it was very irresponsible. It caused an immense level of harm within the EU. Because soon after this, the EU media then really started piling. They started to make various claims about the vaccine and overblowing some of the risks associated with vaccine intake, the blood clots, for example. And this was, to put it mildly, not particularly responsible journalism on their part. And I'm not going to be any kind of fan or complimentary to UK journalism in many areas, but this again was an example where, because the European media felt the need to have this us and them rhetoric. And if there's anything I would say that is a horrible legacy of Brexit, it is that it has created this massive us and them divide. And that is going to have a whole host of problems. And we saw that in this whole furore about the AstraZeneca vaccine. What was the end result of all this? What are the conclusions that we can draw? Well, it did reduce EU intake of the vaccine. It slowed it all down quite dramatically. Some people perhaps died that should not have died. But in reality, it wasn't a significant impact. It was a significant impact. I should choose my words more carefully. It was not a hugely significant impact. And the reason for that is that the EU is a wealthy bloc. They were able to afford all the vaccine, whether it's Pfizer, whether Moderna, and that's what they did. They went and got other supplies as well as AstraZeneca. So although vaccine intake might have been hesitant, it might have been slow for various technical and societal reasons, they were able to vaccinate the population at large. However, more seriously, it increased that UK and EU divide, that toxicity. It made things worse, and things continue to get worse. And unfortunately, it's one of those escalating themes. Because the EU felt the need to do so, the UK government felt the need to do so. For example, the Northern Ireland Protocol. And because the UK government has escalated, the EU has found itself in a position of having to adopt strategies of de-escalating, whilst at the same time, perhaps many of the general public in the EU would rather not, would escalate because of what they have read, what they understand from what the media has reported to them, because they feel that anger, that sense of betrayal to what the UK has done in terms of Brexit and in terms of their perception of the UK withholding vaccine supply, which isn't true, but hey, why let political stories get in the way of facts in real life? And the final point I wanted to make, and this is where people really need to think carefully about how they talk about Brexit and all the issues it throws up, is that because the EU and what Macron did, for example, damaged AstraZeneca as a brand, damaged that vaccine, it has made it so much harder to get it into the developing world. And even now, at this point, I believe the statistics, and it was in the documentary, is that Europe and the US, for example, have a vaccination rate of second and third level jabbed at 57%, for example. In the developing world, it is as low as 7%. And that can be traced in part, well, in a big part, to vaccine supply issues. There's no getting away from that. But another part is the fact that this vaccine, this Oxford vaccine, was deliberately designed to be available to that world, and it has been damaged. It has been damaged because people wanted to play political football with vaccines. They wanted to damage what they perceived as a British vaccine, the British brand, if you like. And this has real-world health consequences. There are people who are not vaccinated who should have been vaccinated. And so that's the final point I wanted to make. That's the linkage I want to make between Brexit and the rollout of vaccines around the world. And so I want to remind people when discussing this sort of topic to try and think about the consequences, think about the actions of what you say, particularly if you're in any kind of position of influence or leadership, that you need to try and find the words to be more measured, to be more positive. And I know it's exceedingly hard to be positive about Brexit on so many levels, but we need to try and find ways to work together on important issues, to forget about the stuff that divides us. Because when it comes to something like a pandemic, the virus doesn't care what nationality you are, what skin color you are, or anything like that. It will infect you, and if given the opportunity, it will kill you. And playing politics in that sort of scenario is just stupid. And unfortunately, that inevitably did happen. That was the case here. So I hope you found this video interesting, and I will look forward to seeing the comments in the box below.